The Pacific Ocean, 1942. A lone American warship, mortally wounded, fights not just the enemy, but the sea itself. Within her flooding hull, a nightmare scenario unfolds, a geyser of salt water threatening to drag the vessel and every soul aboard into the abyss. Standard damage control has failed. The ship is dying. In this moment of absolute crisis, one man faced an impossible choice. This is not just a story of a battle against the Japanese Navy, but a battle against the ocean. This is the story of the sailor who plugged a hull leak with his body on the morning of October 26, 1942. Off the Santa Cruz Islands, the aircraft carrier USS Hornet CV-8, the very vessel that launched the Doolittle raid, became the focus of the Imperial Japanese Navy's wrath. This is the story of her final, desperate hours and the extraordinary sacrifice that took place deep within her steel belly. The Hornet was the heart of Task Force 17. Having struck the first blow against the Japanese homeland, she was a symbol of American resolve. But by late October, the strategic situation in the South Pacific was balanced on a knife edge. After the carrier battles of the Coral Sea and Midway, both the United States and Japan sought definitive naval supremacy around Guadalcanal. The upcoming engagement, the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, would be the fourth major carrier clash of the war. The Hornet's crew, a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced recruits, was at battle stations. Among them was a 21-year-old machinist's mate first class from Kansas named George H. Plummer. His world was not the flight deck or the gun mounts, but the engineering spaces, a labyrinth of steam pipes, turbines, and electrical conduits, the ship's circulatory system. He and his fellow snipes, the engineers and damage control men, worked in sweltering heat to keep the carrier's heart beating, her propellers turning. They were the men who made the ship move. Their adversary that day was the elite Kirabutai, the Japanese carrier strike force, still hungry for vengeance after Midway. The Japanese pilots were among the best in the world, and they were coming. For the men below decks on the Hornet, the battle would not be fought with sight of the enemy, but through the shudder of the deck, the scream of the general quarters alarm, and the terrifying sound of metal being torn apart. At 1009 hours, the storm broke. A coordinated dive bombing and torpedo attack descended upon the Hornet. The world above erupted into a maelstrom of explosions, tracer fire, and screaming metal. A 500-pound bomb smashed through the flight deck near the island, its detonation tearing through several compartments. Moments later, a crippled Japanese Type 99 Val dive bomber, trailing smoke and flame, deliberately crashed into the carrier's side, its bomb and burning fuel causing catastrophic damage. But the worst was yet to come. At 10:15 hours, to Type 91 aerial torpedoes, dropped by deadly Kate torpedo bombers, slammed into the Hornet's starboard side. The twin impacts were like colossal sledgehammers against the hull. Deep in the engineering spaces, lights flickered and died, replaced by the emergency red battle lamps. The concussion was physically sickening. And then came the sound they all feared, the high-pressure roar of seawater, thousands of gallons per minute, blasting into the ship. Damage control parties scrambled. Teams fought fires raging on the hangar deck. Others dragged shoring timbers and collision mats toward the hull breaches. But the torpedo hits had been too precise, too devastating. One particular rupture, near a forward engine room bulkhead, was catastrophic. The force of the inrushing ocean was too great for standard plugs and patches. It blew them out like confetti. The compartment began to flood rapidly. With every passing minute, the Hornet's list to starboard increased. The weight of the water was drowning her. By 10:30 hours, the situation was dire. The flooding threatened to reach the central electrical distribution stations. If those failed, the ship would lose all power lights, pumps, communications, steering. She would be a dead, listing hulk, awaiting the coup de grace. In the choked, dark passageway leading to the rupture, a damage control team, led by a veteran chief petty officer, fought a losing battle. The sea was winning. The crisis point had arrived. The leak was not a clean hole, but a jagged tear in the steel hull, roughly the size of a man's torso. Water shot through it with the force of a fire hose, a relentless, deafening torrent. It was filling the compartment faster than the overtaxed pumps could eject it. The air grew thick with the smell of salt, fuel oil, and fear. The deck plates underfoot were already submerged. The ship groaned in agony, each degree of list a testament to her mortal wound. The chief surveyed the scene, his face grim in the red glow. They had tried everything in the manual. The pressure was simply too immense. To approach the leak directly was to be battered unconscious by the blast of water. The bulkhead behind them was the final barrier before a vital station. If this compartment flooded completely, the chain reaction could doom the entire ship. They had perhaps minutes before the situation became irreversible. The Hornet's fate and the lives of over 2,000 men hung in the balance, focused on this one unstoppable geyser of seawater. It was then that machinist's mate George Plummer made a decision. He assessed the geometry of the leak, the force of the water, and the failing efforts of his team. The theoretical solutions from the training schools had no answer for this. Only an act of sheer, unimaginable physical intervention could work. He shouted to the chief over the roar. His plan was not tactical. It was primal. He would use his own body as a plug. Pushing past his shipmates, Plummer waded into the surging, knee-deep water. The cold was a shock, sapping strength instantly. The force of the inrushing ocean spray was blinding, stinging his skin raw. With sheer determination, he turned his back to the torrent, placed himself against the jagged tear in the hole, and sat down in it. The effect was immediate and brutal. The full, crushing force of the Pacific Ocean now pressed directly onto George Plummer's body. The water sought to pluck him from the breach and blast him into the compartment. He had to brace with every muscle, his boots seeking purchase on the slick, angled deck, his back and shoulders absorbing a pressure that felt like it would crush his ribs. He was a human pressure valve, and he was holding. For his shipmates, it was a moment of stunned, horrific clarity. Plummer's act had reduced the catastrophic jet to a manageable trickle round the edges of his frame. It was the opening they needed. "Pack IT on him," the chief bellowed. The damage control team sprang into a frenzy of coordinated action. They rushed forward with mattresses, sheets of heavy canvas, and wooden shoring timbers. Working with desperate speed, they packed the materials round the plumber's body, using his form as the central core of a makeshift seal. The plumber did not move. He could not. His entire world narrowed to the agony in his back, the deafening noise, and the cold that seeped into his very bones. He gritted his teeth, his face a mask of strain. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The shoring timbers were hammered into place, wedging the packing tight. A more stable, reinforced patch was built round the human cornerstone at its center. Little did Plummer know, as he held his impossible position, that his sacrifice was buying the ship a critical reprieve. Pumps began to gain on the flooding. The lists increased slowed. After what witnesses later described as 22 minutes of excruciating effort, the patch was declared secure enough for him to be relieved. With the water pressure now distributed across the reinforced structure, his shipmates carefully extracted him from the breach. He collapsed, suffering from severe exposure, bruising, and the early stages of hypothermia. But he was alive, and, for now, the Hornet was still afloat. George Plummer's heroic action did not, in the end, save the USS Hornet. The ship had taken too much punishment. After surviving to more air attacks and being abandoned, she was finally scuttled by American destroyers late that night. slipping beneath the waves at approximately 1:35 hours on October 27, 1942. The Battle of Santa Cruz was a tactical victory for Japan, but at such a high cost in aircraft and veteran aircrews that their carrier force would never again regain its offensive power. Of the Hornet's crew, 118 were killed in action during the battle, with another 307 rescued from the water after abandonment. Among the survivors was machinist's mate First Class George H. Plummer. His story, passed from the few who witnessed it in that flooded compartment, became legend within the Navy for his extraordinary courage and disregard for his own life in the face of certain drowning. George Plummer was awarded the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. His citation credits his act with undoubtedly saving the ship for a considerable period, allowing critical damage control to continue elsewhere and ensuring the orderly evacuation of hundreds of his shipmates. Asterisk. His legacy is one of the ultimate sailor's sacrifices, the man who became part of his ship. In the annals of naval damage control, his name stands as a symbol of the raw, human spirit that can, for a crucial moment, hold back the sea itself. The Hornet was lost, but because of him, countless more of her crew lived to fight another day. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War, a story not of grand strategy, but of individual valor in the darkest, most submerged corners of a dying ship. Subscribe to WWI Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life. The crisis was a symphony of terror. Above, on the shattered flight deck, the fight continued against attacking aircraft. But here, in compartment A105, adjacent to the forward engine room, the war was elemental. Man versus the ocean. The Toulon-Lance torpedoes had struck with mathematical cruelty, exploiting a vulnerability in the Hornet's underwater protection system. The resulting geyser wasn't just water. It was a mixed torrent of seawater, fuel oil from ruptured lines, and hydraulic fluid, creating a toxic, slippery slurry on the deck. The chief damage control officer, Lieutenant J. Arthur R. Davis, felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the water temperature. He had seen hull breaches before, but this was different. The pressure was estimated at over 15 pounds per square inch, enough to break a man's arm if he got it in the wrong position. Standard doctrine called for a tapered wooden plug, a soft patch of canvas and rubber, driven home by a brave sailor with a sledgehammer. They tried, a burly machinist's mate, protected by nothing but courage, stepped forward, plug in hand. The water blast caught the plug like a leaf in a hurricane, smashing it and the man back against a steam pipe, breaking two of his ribs. Davis knew the physics. This leak, if not contained in the next 5 minutes, would flood the forward fire room feed pumps. That would mean a loss of steam pressure, leading to a loss of electrical generators. It was a countdown to total blackout. The Hornet would be a sitting duck, her radar blind, her radio silent, her steering frozen. The list had already reached 12 degrees. At 15 degrees, the flight deck would become unusable, trapping any remaining aircraft. At 20, recovery operations would cease. They were at the tipping point, both literally and figuratively. George Plummer was not an officer. He was not in command. He was a 21-year-old from a Kansas farm, a man whose expertise was in the whirring precision of turbines, not the chaotic violence of a hull rupture. He watched the failed plug attempt, saw the pain on his shipmate's face, and calculated not with a slide rule, but with instinct. He pushed forward to Lieutenant Davis. "Yes, sir," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the roar. The hole shaped roughly, like a tear. A plug won't seat. The only thing that'll match the shape is a body. I can sit in it, back to the sea. You can pack round me. Davis stared, the insane logic of it cutting through the chaos. It went against every safety protocol. It was a potential death sentence for Plummer, but the protocols had failed. The ship was dying. He gave a sharp, agonized nod. "Do it, Plummer, and God be with you." Plummer stripped off his bulky life jacket and helmet, handing them to the sailor next to him, a silent acknowledgement he would not need them where he was going. He took a final, deep breath of the oil-tainted air. The moment Plummer seated himself in the jackhammer of steel, the world changed. The shock was physical and auditory. The deafening, high-pitched roar was instantly muffled to a deep, ominous thrum that vibrated through his entire skeleton. The pressure was immense, a constant, crushing weight intent on expelling him. It forced the air from his lungs. He gasped, sucking in spray. The cold was a live wire, searing through his denim work jacket and shirt, paralyzing in its intensity. He locked his arms against the twisted hull plates on either side, muscles corded with strain. His boots scrabbled for purchase. He could feel the sharp edges of torn metal digging into his back and thighs. Every surge of the ship, every groan of the strained hull, was transmitted directly into his body. He was no longer just on the ship. He was part of it, a living, suffering component of its structure. Around him, his shipmates became a machine of salvation. Led by Chief Petty Officer Marvin B. Brick McGraw, they worked with a precision born of pure adrenaline. A soaked, heavy-duty canvas damage control mat was first. "Get IT behind his back," McGraw roared. Two sailors wrestled the stiff material between Plummer's back and the incoming sea, the water immediately plastering it against him and the hull, forming a first layer. Then came a mattress, jammed in and round his sides. Plummer grimaced, the padding a minor relief against the steel teeth at his back, shoring. Now, timber 4x4 south and 6x6 south was hammered into place, creating a box-like crib round Plummer's torso, basing the mattress and canvas, transferring the ocean's force from his body to the stronger, intact frames of the ship. Each hammer blow echoed in the compartment, a rhythm of defiance. Plummer's vision began to blur, a mix of exhaustion, pain, and hypothermia. He focused on a single rivet head in front of his face. He would not move. He could not move. After an eternity, the chief's hand was on his shoulder, mouth close to his ear. "George, we've got IT. On 3, we pull you clear. 1, 2, 3. Hands grabbed his arms, his belt, and yanked. There was a terrible suction, a ripping sensation, and he came free, stumbling backward into the arms of his fellows. The patch, a grotesque monument of canvas, mattress, and timber, held. The geyser was gone, reduced to a few weeping seams. George Plummer, shaking uncontrollably, was carried from the compartment, his body a map of lacerations and massive, deep tissue bruises already turning purple. He had held for 22 minutes. He had bought them time, asterisk.